The Decision, The Role of Leaders on the Battlefield. Major Michael F. McNamara, United States Marine Corps, retired.
Uncertainty, which we've beaten to death. The biggest fear about not having enough information, you can see it on the table here, is the fear that you will make the wrong decision. That's never the problem. The problem is that you make no decision, not that you make the wrong decision. You know, if we can go back to those of us who were in Vietnam, how many times units were frozen by one sniper shot, frozen by a contact, a whole company pinned down. Uncertainty. What am I up against? What is he trying to do? I gotta have perfect information because I need to make the right decision. The worst thing that can happen to me is to make the wrong decision, and that's wrong. The worst thing that can happen to you is happening. You're making no decision. You know, and that's what uncertainty causes. Inaction, indecision, and that's the worst thing that can happen. Better a wrong decision here, clearly, anytime.
I want to make a couple comments about, at the time, Colonel Zinni's thoughts on making no decision. He's 1,000% right. The environment that we make decisions in a conflict, in combat, if you will, is extremely unique. And it takes a while to get used to it. And getting used to it should happen in training, because that's the kind of training we should do. And I'm talking about map exercises, sand table exercises, all the different ways you can get repetitions for leaders to get them accustomed to making decisions with limited information, going into execution, and then continuing to evolve what they've decided until they win. It's a different way of living. But you can teach it, you can coach it, and they can do it, and they can get comfortable doing it, which is really important before you have to go spill blood and learn harder lessons. Class outline. The introduction to this class is a video by a Marine who's one of the most respected leaders I've ever come across in my life. He would rise to the rank of general officer in the Marine Corps, wear 4 stars, obviously, and he would run Central Command. He would become the United States Special Envoy to the Middle East. That's the kind of guy he was. Anthony Zinni, Tony to his friends, funny, one of the smartest dudes in the room, combat experiences in Vietnam. The most important thing he could do was think it and articulate it. And that little clip I use for the introduction, I think, is a really important way to begin the study of becoming a decision maker. Part 1 that we'll go through is a little bit of a historical example about a leader by the name of Strong Vincent, who was a colonel in the United States Army during the Civil War, and who I believe is actually the guy who saved the Union at Gettysburg. Most people have never heard his name. But he's a great example of a leader who had his head in the game, who was smart, who understood his job, who used his initiative. He then coordinated his initiative, and then he led his unit, and he executed with his unit. And his efforts absolutely instrumental in the Army of the Potomac not being flanked at Gettysburg as they were at Chancellorsville, and ultimately of turning the tide of the Battle of Gettysburg. And again, the interesting part about that is that you've never heard of him. Part 2 is a look at the leader's mandate, decision-making in time. And the in time part is really important because it's not like you have forever to make these decisions. You are constantly trying to cycle faster than your opponent. And in that way, you'll defeat them. Part 3, the decision-making environment talks about the world you have to get comfortable in, which is unlike any world you've ever lived in your life. Part 4, the decision-making process, just walks you through the things that have to be done. Part 5, decision-making techniques, there's 2 of them. And so we'll take a look at those. Part 6, the leader then becomes a synthesizer in time of decision-making techniques, orders techniques, and making sure that they can do that to put the people who will risk their lives doing these things in the best position to execute. And that's the goal we have to keep in mind. So again, this is a time competitive event. Certain things have to happen, and we got to get comfortable doing that. And so if you understand the time element of it, a lot of times it means we have to truncate different events so we can give the people below us time to disseminate an order, time to rehearse, so that they can execute as deliberately as possible. So part 6 looks at that. Part 7 talks about execution. Once we go into the operation, what are we doing? How are we doing that? Part 8 is the after action review or critique, as it was known to me. And we do it the way I used to do it. And so my challenge to you is to listen to that and then tweak it and maybe make it your way. But I'll give you the way I used to do it. And it has 2 very, very definitive pieces to it. And the way we treat those pieces is very different. All right. And then part 9 is some final thoughts after we've gone through this look at decision making. So, welcome to the decision. Part 1, the leader who saved the Union at Gettysburg. This is Colonel Strong Vincent, United States Army. He was the 3rd Brigade commanding officer of the 1st Division of the 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac during the Battle of Gettysburg, and that battle took place July 1st through 3rd in 1863. Colonel Vincent's background and billet at Gettysburg. Colonel Vincent was born in Waterford, Pennsylvania, and like many natives of Pennsylvania, going back into their home state to fight was a very somber experience. He was raised by B.B. Vincent, his father, who was an iron worker, and Sarah Ann Strong Vincent. Professionally, he had graduated from Trinity College and Harvard University in 1959. He was a lawyer, and he practiced law in Erie, Pennsylvania before the war broke out, and he joined. His unit, the Army of the Potomac, was commanded by General Meade, who had just been placed in charge of the Army of the Potomac. The 5th Corps was led by Major General Sykes. His division was the 1st Division, led by Major General Barnes. And as I said before, he commanded the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Division. Gettysburg, Day 2, early afternoon. On the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, it was essentially a meeting engagement into 2 forces that were moving. The Army of Northern Virginia, led by Robert E. Lee, had sent elements to Gettysburg to find shoes and to forage. The Army of the Potomac, led by General Meade, was moving north to try to engage Lee, who was transferring the war to Pennsylvania. They clash west of Gettysburg. And when the sun comes up on day 2, the Army of Northern Virginia is located on Seminary Ridge, and the Army of the Potomac is in a fishhook formation southeast of the city of Gettysburg. Colonel Vincent, along with his division, are in reserve and located behind the center of the Union line, an area that will come to be defined by places of significant fighting like the wheat field, like the peach orchard. They are behind those terrain features. Major General Dan Sickles, who was the commanding general of the 3rd Corps, had deviated from General Meade's orders. He thought that he should move his corps forward out to the Emmitsburg Pike with his left flank in the peach orchard. In doing so, Sickles exposed the left flank of the Army of the Potomac to Longstreet's corps' pending flanking attack. Let me show you what I just explained on a map. So sometime between 1200 and 1530 on July 2nd, the first event is Sykes's Corps, which Vincent is a part of, goes into reserve on the backside of Cemetery Ridge. Now, the Union position is often described as a fishhook. You can see that at the top of the map, you can see towards the top of the map the hook part, right? Where Slocum is, then it bends around to ultimately where Hancock was. Okay. Sickles then moves his corps forward out to the Emmitsburg Pike using uncoordinated initiative. And you can see the red in item number 3 as Sickles is doing that because he believes it's the right thing to do. Longstreet is already on the move, attempting to flank the Union left flank. Sickles unwittingly lends itself to that. So that is the situation between noon and 1530 on July 2nd. And again, Vincent is with his brigade on the backside of Cemetery Ridge in reserve, waiting for this thing to get going. Okay, so 3 things. Sykes and Vincent, all those guys, they're on the backside in reserve. 2, Sickles moves his corps out to the Emmitsburg Pike. You see number 2 there. And then 3, Longstreet is already on the move. And Sickles' movement plays into Lee's plan. The next thing that happens is that at about 1530 on July 2nd, Major General Meade's chief engineer, a brigadier general by the name of Warren, first name Governor, I think, heads down to Little Round Top to do a reconnaissance of the Union left flank now that Sickles has moved out to the Emmitsburg Pike. From that top, it's pretty interesting to read what he sees. He sees all these bayonets heading south in a flanking movement. You can imagine the oh shit moment then, right? And so what does Warren do? Warren sends a courier looking for General Barnes, who commands the reserve division closest to him, right, that's on the backside of Cemetery Ridge, with a note. Send a brigade to yonder small hilltop. And the courier crosses path with Colonel Vincent. This map depicts General Warren's oh shit moment. Sickles punches out. He goes to do a reconnaissance of the left flank. He gets up on Little Round Top. He sees all these bayonets glistening in the sun through the tree lines. And you could only imagine what he thought. We're now in Pennsylvania. If Lee rolls our flank, where do we go? We go north, further into the Union, right? Further into Pennsylvania, yada, yada, yada. So a pretty incredible oh shit moment. And then from there, you can see in that green circle, that's where Sykes's corps is, and Barnes' division, part of Sykes's corps, Vincent's brigade, part of Barnes' division. Okay, so the courier heads in that direction, looking for General Barnes. The next event that takes place is the courier event. So Vincent, milling about, right, listening to different parts of the battle go on, wondering what's in store for them. He sees a courier looking for somebody, and he calls out to the courier, "Come here." And he says, "Who are you looking for?" And he says, "Sir, this message is for General Barnes." And Vincent says, "Give it to me." And the courier says, "Sir, I'm supposed to take this to General Barnes." And he says, "I will take responsibility for this." So he opens the message, and evidently this was not a common thing to do. He opens the message, he reads Warren's message to Barnes, he hands the message back to the courier and says, "Tell Brigadier General Barnes, I will take the responsibility to take my brigade there." Now, if you contrast Vincent's actions with Sickles' actions, uncoordinated initiative, doesn't check with me before he does it, he just does it. And then you contrast that with Vincent, reads the message, coordinates his actions with the guy he works for, General Barnes, and then he gets going. The guy who wrote a book about all this is a guy named Oliver North. He was Vincent's standard bearer and bugler. So he's carrying the colors of the brigade. And so he gives orders to the brigade, move to that hill, and then he and Norton, Vincent and Norton, they take off ahead of everybody, and they're on horseback. They ride to the backside of Little Round Top, they dismount, and they go to the top of Little Round Top. And you can imagine what he sees. He sees what Warren saw, and that is Hood's division of Longstreet's corps is moving well beyond Sickles' left. And what they're trying to do is obviously get on the Union left flank. And so what you have is a situation where Hood's division is closing on Little Round Top from the southwest, and Vincent's brigade is closing on Little Round Top from the northeast. All set in motion by Warren and Vincent. But again, if Vincent doesn't do what he does, by the time Barnes gets the message, by the time Barnes gets a message to Vincent, Little Round Top is lost. They don't get there in time. So I think it's important when we look at these things to remember this is a time competitive event. And Vincent's actions are absolutely in time. On this map, you can see obviously where the courier event takes place. Now the question is, can Vincent's brigade get to Little Round Top before Hood does? This next map depicts the situation as it evolved. You see Longstreet's guys southwest of Little Round Top. You see Vincent's brigade en route to Little Round Top, and then Vincent at the summit with Norton and the brigade colors so that the brigade knows where to go. And so that's this race that's taking place at about 1600. Between 1600 and 2000, a meeting engagement occurs on the forward slope of Little Round Top. The lead elements of Vincent's brigade went straight into the attack as they came over the top of Little Round Top. They were in a column of four so they could move quickly. They had no round in the chamber. They fixed bayonets on the move, and they went straight into the fight with nothing loaded in their rifles. Crazy, right? When you hear it. And they encountered Hood's Confederate soldiers as they were trying to come up the southwest side of Little Round Top. And so this immediately becomes a desperate hand-to-hand fight. And what those lead regiments do is they buy everybody else time. And so again, they encounter Hood's guys and the fight begins. Vincent then places his following regiments in position on the military crest of Little Round Top. So the military crest is just below the top of the hill. Okay, so he's putting them into position. And after the initial engagement, Hood's guys recoil. The lead regiments come back up and take positions on the military crest. And he's now got his brigade kind of sort of in position, although he keeps filling them in to the left as you're looking at his position from where he would be standing. As the fighting rages, Vincent sees that the 16th Michigan was struggling, and he was afraid that they were going to buckle and fold to enemy pressure. So what does he do? He goes to them. He has a riding crop in his hand that his wife had given him, and he's trying to motivate his soldiers. He's on a rock in an elevated position so they can see him and hear him when he is shot through the femoral artery in his upper thigh. He is carried from Little Round Top to a nearby farm where he dies 5 days later. On this map, you can see a breakdown of the regiments that fought at Little Round Top on the Union side and the Confederate side. Okay, you can see where the 16th Michigan was. You can see where the 20th Maine was positioned, very famous for the actions of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. But Chamberlain, who gets much credit for this, he's not even anywhere close to this if it's not for Vincent. And so this fight goes on, and at the end of the day, the soldiers of John Hood and Longstreet don't take Little Round Top. I won't say they're routed, but their attack is repulsed and the Union left flank holds. And that's a big deal at Gettysburg. The rest of the story from day 2 at Gettysburg, Vincent was promoted to brigadier general on the evening of July 2nd. As I said before, he would die of his wounds 5 days later. His wife gave birth to a baby girl 2 months later. The baby died before reaching the age of 1 and is buried between her mother and her father. The moral of this story and the reason why I use it in this class is this. Strong Vincent did not get up that day thinking he may save the Union. But that's exactly what he did. If the Union left flank gets rolled that day, the rout is on, and the Army of the Potomac is heading further northeast, and the Army of Northern Virginia has a great victory in the north. Vincent, to me, is an example of an intelligent leader. He had his head in the game, sitting in reserve. He used his initiative. He coordinated that initiative. He made decisions. He put those he led into positions that led to victory. That was his job. Colonel Strong Vincent may be one of the most significant leaders in American history, and his professional example is certainly worthy of our study. You can look up Oliver Norton's book. I have a hardback copy of it. It's a wonderfully written documentation of Norton's experience during the war, and certainly looked up to and revered Strong Vincent. But Vincent is an example to every one of us of what it is to be a leader in combat, to have your head in the game, to use your initiative, to coordinate that initiative as soon as you can, and then to put the people you lead in position to win, and then manage the fight as it occurs in front of you. And for him, it cost him his life. But he's a great example of what we should attempt to emulate as leaders on the battlefield. Part 2, the leader's mandate, decision-making in time. Action in war is a time-competitive event. And the essential thing is action. Action has 3 pieces: a decision born of thought, and that's the thinking piece; an order that prepares the unit to execute, that's articulating it; and then the execution itself, doing it. But what's really important to understand is this entire script unfolds in time. You don't have an unlimited amount of time to get ready for it. And so you've got to tailor everything so that you can get the maximum out of it while managing the time so that you can get your unit in a position to execute as deliberately as possible, and that we're not pulling stuff out of our ass as we're running to helicopters. Creating a bias for action. This is a quote from a publication that was written for the Marine Corps University by Dr. Russell Stolfe, entitled A Bias for Action. The senior commanders of the 7th Panzer Division allowed subordinate leaders to make mistakes. The tolerance of these leaders was never an excuse for slipshod performance. It was the calm recognition that rapid action in the face of uncertainty will result in errors. And this is the important part: errors that can be overcome by more action. So when you see this quote, it's not that they allowed people to make mistakes. They knew that mistakes were going to happen in this world of friction and uncertainty and chaos on the battlefield. But the most important quality they had to teach was to not get consumed by the fact that you didn't get it right, but to make a subsequent decision that got it right. And so you're really teaching decisiveness. Very few military operations come out of the wrapper and are executed the way they're conceived. There's adaptations made in all of them. But depending on how you train your subordinates, they may or may not be comfortable making those decisions, and they may or not understand. What I really need from you is to be decisive. Not just coming out of the chute, but after that, and after that, and after that, and after that. And we're going to evolve this to a win. Okay, that's how it works. That's what it's really like to do this. And so Rommel initially leads the 7th Panzer Division in France. He's not with them in Russia, where Stolfe would argue that they perform at a higher level, which is interesting. Rommel at that point is in North Africa. But in this bias for action, it's how do you train to that? And I think this quote captures it very, very well. This idea of coordinated initiative came out of me going to the National Archives and just asking hard questions among my peers. Because among people that were advocating that the Marine Corps should become executors of a very German style of warfare, many of them were academics. And so when you as a professional sat down and said, how does this work? Everybody can't be doing their own thing. So this whole idea of initiative, how does it work? How did they do it? So I was reading a book entitled Wiedemeyer Reports, and it was written by General Alfred C. Wiedemeyer. In one of the footnotes, he's chiefly noted for being one of the authors of the Victory Plan, which is the plan to win World War II. And I think he's involved in that as a major, if you can imagine such a thing. And so in the footnote, Wiedemeyer grew up German, he spoke German, so he was one of the few American officers that attended the Kriegsakademie, the German war college. And so the footnote says something, that he had translated the German troop leading manual, and it was in his papers at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So I got my ass in my car, and I drove up to the National Archives. I got my little archivist card. I went in, requested his papers, and bigger than shit, they were there. And so I copied the English translation that he did of the German troop leading manual, and I was specifically interested in the idea of initiative and what exactly did the Germans write. And this is what I found, okay? And this is where this concept of coordinated initiative begins to kind of coalesce in my brain. Okay, so this is the translation of the 1933 version of their troop leading manual. The decision arises from the mission and the situation. Should the mission no longer suffice as the fundamental vehicle for success, or the situation is changed by events, the decision must take these considerations into account. Pretty basic stuff, right? Here's where it doesn't get basic. And this whole idea of kind of skip and go naked, everybody doing their own thing goes away. There's a very ominous sentence here. He who changes the mission or does not execute the one given must report his actions at once and assumes all responsibility for the consequences. That does not sound like a skip and go naked organization. That sounds like an organization deadly serious about warfighting, and if you fritter away the combat power of the higher unit for some bullshit reason, they're going to have your ass, and you need to know that. And it finishes with, he must always keep in mind the whole situation. And so from this, I always took what these academics said with a grain of salt, because I think they were trying to be advocates for a certain style. But when you got right down to the way the Germans practiced it, what they wrote in their troop leading manuals, it was very different. But this idea of coordinated initiative, he who changes the mission or does not execute the one given must report his actions at once. To me, that's reality on the battlefield, because reality on the battlefield is if your own units don't know that you're going to be someplace because you've changed your mission and you're now where they didn't believe anybody was, they'll kill you just as quick as the bad guys will kill you. And shrapnel doesn't discriminate. It's an equal opportunity event. So I think that this whole idea connotes a mature style and a mature understanding of what it is to lead in combat, to make decisions. And it's great to say we need to use our initiative, but as soon as you say that word initiative, right afterwards, and I think it should be a single term, coordinated initiative, because the implication is you can't be doing your own thing out there. It doesn't work like that. Part 3, the decision-making environment. Battlefield dynamics, friction, and uncertainty. The most famous writer who's written about friction, and I believe who coined the term, is Karl von Clausewitz, and he writes about it in his military theory classic on war. Says this: in war, everything is slowed by the influence of innumerable insignificant circumstances which cannot be evaluated on paper and which lead one to fall short of his aim. And I think as a professional in training, you go try to execute something. The water shows up late. The ammunition shows up late. It took longer than you thought to get the order. You're now trying to go through this orders process very quickly. And it's not working. The squad leaders aren't where they're supposed to be. So you got to round them up as you get ready to issue an order. Now you're late. Are you going to cross the line of departure to go into the attack late? So friction is a constant on the battlefield. It's kind of like Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And in the Marine Corps, there's a term, and it is called Semper Gumby, which is you better be flexible all the time because it's going to change. And so you begin to take that into your planning. But in terms of battlefield dynamics, omnipresent, always dogging you, some days worse than others, but always present. And you have to understand it. It's going to rear its head. The second major battlefield dynamic is uncertainty. And you heard the video of General Zinni at the start of this, which is him talking about what uncertainty caused in Vietnam. People afraid to make a decision because they were afraid to make the wrong decision, right? So this is not an easy thing to get used to. And so you have to constantly work at it in training by changing situations, by leaving out information so that people get used to being able to work with an uncertain situation. And then pretty soon they're pretty accustomed to it, but you got to train to it. Successive acts in war are most often not premeditated acts. They're improvised adjustments to a changed situation. Adjustments occur because your head is in the game. You see the changed situation occurring in front of you, and you adjust to it. Your knowledge and your confidence will guide your decision. That's why it's so important. If you're going to be part of the killing and the life-saving, you better take that stuff really seriously. You better study it because you have to put your head on your pillow for the rest of your life. And someday, somebody's life may depend on your confidence and your knowledge of your job, even as a young second lieutenant, even as a young corporal or a sergeant. That's why this is a very serious profession. That's why you got to devote yourself to it, because when we go play, you bet your life. The last thing you want to have happen is fail because you didn't study what you should have studied. You didn't know the things you should have known. And then somebody pays for it with their life because nobody can lift that burden from you after it happens. In all situations, the challenge for leaders is to discover the situation in spite of the fog of war, that uncertainty. To evaluate well, not perfectly, but well, what is known. To estimate what is unknown. To reach a decision quickly, to execute that decision powerfully and unhesitatingly. To keep your head in the game, and then to continue to evolve decisions until the mission is accomplished. Remember, poor decisions are quickly overcome by subsequent good decisions. And I'll give you just a little example here of what I'm talking about. One of the worst things that can happen when you begin to, let's just say you're doing a movement to contact. So your unit is moving to locate the enemy. And let's just, for the sake of discussion, you don't know this, but the intel you got was not very good. And as you're moving, all of a sudden in front of you, there is machine gun fire, and those machine guns are interlocked. And you're hearing mortars thumping, dung, 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 and the mortars are falling in dead space. And you as a professional, as you look around and watch this, as your unit goes to ground and begins to return fire, it very quickly dawns on you, we've walked into a prepared defense. What the hell just happened? Okay, but the good news is you're an American. You throw a heavy, heavy right hand, a right hand that no other lieutenant, no other sergeant, no other staff sergeant throws in the world, is the right hand that we throw. So what do? Go to ground, you smoke the shit out of the enemy positions, the places you see tracers coming from. So you're buying yourself a little bit of time, and then you take our supporting arms and you blow a hole in the middle of that shit, and you create a flank, and you attack into that flank. And maybe you turn, outwards in two directions, and you roll up somebody's flank. And that's the whole idea of, even if you screw it up, you're going to be thinking it, and you're lucky because you're an American. If you're a lieutenant for a third world country or a second world country, you don't have that juice. We do. So again, it's have your head in the game, be decisive, and don't be afraid to unscrew a bad decision with a subsequent good decision. So this is the antithesis of what General Zinni talked about in that first video, which is to be paralyzed by your uncertainty. The great challenge is be uncomfortable with the uncertainty. Understand what the major variables that you don't really have are. And you do that by, your experience, by looking at the map, seeing things. I wish I knew this, but I don't. And a lot of times those things begin to clear as you begin to conduct the operation. And then there's not as much uncertainty because you're discovering these things. Okay? And again, that's what it is to be a professional. But getting comfortable with uncertainty, knowing how to do it, having your head in the game, all huge, huge, huge things. The estimate of the situation. You're going to get intelligence given to you. And then you're going to have to sit down and look at the terrain, and you're going to have to use your own brain power, because it might not be as refined as you would like it in the part of the objective that you're going to own. And so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to fill in some of those gaps. The most important thing is focus on the enemy. I learned this from General Zinni. Focus on the red stuff. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Okay? But when I turn the map, if I was him and I was given the mission that we believe that they've been given, here's what I'd be doing. I'd be on the reverse slope. I'd have people here. I'd have people here. I'd have security here. So these are all the things we're going to look for. And so those are the things that we're talking about in terms of an estimate of the situation. Things I know, things I don't know. But if I was him, I would have stuff in this general vicinity. Right? So as we move and as we approach these things, we will approach it as if, right, they're smart, they want to live, and they're good warfighters. And that's always the best way to approach things. The idea of educated assumptions is along the lines I just talked about. Okay, assume they're smart. Assume that they're combat tested. Assume that they are willing to fight, that they want to live. And then ask yourself, what would I do if I were them? And you can begin to circle the terrain and say, well, I'd be doing this here, I'd be doing this here. And then those become, things that you want to look at, places of interest for you. The next thing is understand in your head the level of risk associated with each different enemy course of action. And so, as I said, if he's on the reverse slope, what does that mean to me? Okay. And I can really handle this unless there's a unit that we don't know is out there and they appear on my flank. Okay. That's the most dangerous course of action to me, because that means I'm going to take fire from a direction I'm not anticipating. And that's when you get a lot of casualties. That's when I get units rolled up, and that can't happen. And so as you go through that, right? As you go through that, and then you identify that in your mind, okay? So it's kind of like you see NFL coaches with like a play sheet, right? They always cover their mouths with those sheets. It's kind of having one of those, right, in your head. In this phase of the operation, I'm most concerned if there's any activity over here, because I'm the right flank of the company. And the way I'm going to get messed up and the company's going to get messed up is if there's any activity here. So my squad on that side, right, has got to have people with eyeballs constantly on the flank because of the risk associated with that course of action. So when you sit down and you do the estimate of the situation and you're just trying to fill in gaps and tell people, okay, here's what I think it might be out there. And again, constantly speaking in terms like that, might be, okay, in the vicinity of, as opposed to they're here. Because your intelligence is a snapshot in time unless you have full motion video. So when you articulate the enemy situation by using these terms like vicinity of, you're connoting that they may not be in that specific grid location. So we're going to draw a bigger circle around that location. And so it's a way to reinforce the idea of this dynamic battlefield, that this enemy will move, all right? This is not a set piece event. They're going to move, we're going to move, right? What we got was a snapshot in time from our intel folks. That's the best they have at the time they gave it to us, okay? And so again, quantifying in this operation, given my piece of it, what's the most dangerous thing the enemy's going to do? And I note that. And so then in execution, as we begin to do this, what am I looking for? I'm looking for any indicator, right? Any enemy activity over there that I see anything that makes my antennas go up and say, uh-oh, what's going on? Okay. So focus on the enemy, make educated assumptions, and understand in your head the level of risk associated with different things the enemy will do and what is the most deadly thing that enemy can do. And I'll give you an example in Iraq. In Iraq, the most deadly thing they could do, and they tried to do this all the time, and they were good at it. They would watch you and watch you and watch you, and they would see how you operated. And then they would shoot at you if you were, say, in a firm base, and they were trying to blow up the firm base. And the way they would do that would be with like a cement truck, and they would load that big cylinder. They would load it full of artillery rounds. I mean, load it. I mean, this thing's a gigantic bomb. Or the other thing they would use would be a water truck. Do the same thing. And so in the days leading up to their attack, what they would do is they would shoot at you and they would watch your reaction. So let's just say you had a firm base in a compound, right? A walled compound. And then on the tallest building in the compound, you had an OP. It was sandbagged. It had a roof over it that had layers of sandbags that could take a mortar shot and things like that. So they would shoot mortars at you. And if you brought your guys down, they noted that. Okay? And they noted how long it took you. And so on the day of the attack, what they would do would be they would shoot mortars. You bring your guys down. They know when your guys are going to come out. They shoot mortars again, and now they're engaging you from the same general direction as they fired the mortars with machine guns. And what are they trying to get you to do? Focus towards the machine guns, which obviously you would, right? But if you don't have 360 security, if you don't have somebody watching your blind side, guess which direction the water truck or the cement truck is coming from? The exact opposite. And by the time you look up, if you don't have that shit, guess what's coming through your gate? About a ton of TNT that's going to kill a lot of people. And so that's how good they are at watching us, right? And so as you're there, as you learn these things, right, constantly with your head on a swivel, constantly providing security 360 degrees, those were just the basics of life in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because in Iraq, not so much in Afghanistan, my experience, but in Iraq, the suicide bomber thing was terrifying because they were really good at it. They would distract you. They would distract you a second time, and then ba-boom. All of a sudden, somebody's in the middle of you, whether it's with a vest on or with a concrete truck or a water truck, and gaboosh, it's gone. So again, head in the game, understanding the enemy, the way they fight, and what their most deadly course of action is, making sure that you have, people looking out for that stuff and that you're sensitive to it as well as the leader. So the decision maker's natural habitat in combat is extremely unique. You're expected to make decisions with very limited information. And in the future, if you fight a peer, what is it going to be like then when your radios are shut off? How are you receiving data? What happens if, your satellites get blown out? That the first thing that happens is, we and the peer we're fighting, we blow each other's satellites out. How long does it take us to regenerate our satellites? And then how often do they get blown up? So again, this idea of limited information, and I would tell you this, even in a permissive environment like Iraq, like Afghanistan, you still felt like you didn't have enough information about what was going on in front of you. And I would tell you that the average Marine unit, they didn't have drones in front of them. They had Marines walking down streets looking for bad guys. So the whole idea of limited information, you won't have nearly the amount of information that you'd like to have. Assuming all the information you've been given is correct is foolish. Intelligence is a art that includes part science, part deductive logic, part experience. Sometimes they get it wrong. Okay? And so, but again, it takes time to learn that, but you can learn it in training. You can teach it in training. Okay? So, learning how to operate with limited information. That's all we have. Let's go. The next thing is, understanding the dynamic situation that you're in. That whatever intelligence you got was a snapshot in time, unless you're watching full motion live video. And so you have to treat it as such. That's why those words like in the vicinity of, right? Last seen at, right? They all connote an impermanence, right? That this thing changes. And then the other thing relative to the dynamic situation is assuming that the enemy is intelligent and is constantly making adjustments so they can live. And they're doing that because they're experienced warfighters. And that's what experienced warfighters do. Okay, so with limited information, with a dynamic situation, right? With a dynamic situation. Part 4, the process from start to finish. I think this is important that we take a look at this process from start to finish, and you get a chance to think about it in terms of doing it in time. Okay? So the first thing that's going to happen is you'll get a warning order, right, that outlines, hey, the order that you're going to receive is going to go at this time. It's going to go at this location. Logistics are going to be going on here. Comm stuff is going to go here, and you're going to get this warning order. So the first thing you do is you turn that around as quickly as you can. You make a few notes from it. You hand it to maybe your XO or your staff sergeant, if you're a platoon commander, or if you're a squad leader. You sit down and you start writing. And so I know this is where I'm going to get all this stuff, and we start moving. I know that our leader is going to go get their order, right? This is the area that we've been told we're going to operate in, so we're going to build a terrain model. And all these things begin to happen concurrently. And I cannot tell you how important that is. I had the opportunity to go be a part of the U.S. Army's Op 4 when they did Force on Force at Fort Irwin in the 1990s. And so my company, my light armored reconnaissance company, Marine Corps type, was a separate battalion working for the Op 4, fighting an American armored brigade at Fort Irwin. And I will tell you this, man, those guys were absolutely amazing executing what are known as the troop leading procedures. When they got a warning order, they just turned to. They built giant terrain models. They had spray paint. They had chalk. They had string. They had placards for units. They had 3x5 cards for individual squads and platoons and stuff that they could put on the terrain. All this stuff they would bust out. And I'd never seen that kind of deliberate preparation before. And I was blown away. I could not have been more impressed. And I would bring my NCOs and staff NCOs to watch this when we first got there. And I'd look at them and say, this is how we do it. We're going to copy them because this is the best I've ever seen. And it was all about concurrent operations in preparation, right, to disseminate information, to rehearse so that we could execute in the most deliberate way possible, right? And deliberate execution is what we want. We're pretty sure, we hope our intel assessment is right. We're not fragging and doing different things. And so that's what we want to do. And the warning order is absolutely critical to doing that. And I would tell you that just in the course of your daily life, get good at issuing warning orders. Get good at telling them, hey, these are the basics. This time with this stuff here, more to follow. And then when you get more, you push more. But don't wait to give them the whole thing perfectly. Give them what you have when you get it so they can begin to get ready. Next, we've already talked about it, doing the estimate of the situation. Okay, you're going to get an intel dump. It may not be specific enough for your area, and you're going to have to develop it a little bit. Okay, so you do that. Then a decision gets made, right? Here's what we're going to do. The order then, right, is the articulation of that decision. This is the mission. These are all the tasks for subordinates. Here's the fire support plan, blah, 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 blah. So we do that. Now comes, again, the troop leading procedures, right? I talked about building terrain models and all the rest of that stuff that gets going, and it's going concurrently. So after the order ends, the back briefs begin immediately. You gather your subordinates and you look at them, and they should be able to regurgitate, right, the mission and their task in it. And then you go through with every one of them, you. And if they screw it up, then you unscrew it. And that's why you're doing it, right? And then they get a chance to ask questions. So now we're done with that. So everybody's on the same sheet of paper. We know what we're doing. Next, we take everybody and we hop on the terrain model. And that's why you build them big, so people can walk on them. Okay, and let's just say we're being a platoon and we're going to conduct an attack, right? You have the first squad leader, you have the second squad leader, you have the third squad leader, you have the machine gun team leader, you have the radio operator, all those people, those leaders, and you have your platoon sergeant, they're all on the terrain model, okay? And they're walking, right? So it's like, okay, if we're going north into the attack, what formation are we going to be in? It was laid out in the order. Let's get in that. Everybody does. Okay, and then what you want, and I saw armored units do this, but they made the leader of the unit, so let's just say a squad leader, he had to stick his arm out like it was a gun barrel, and he had to indicate the direction he was oriented, which to me was very interesting, because a lot of times in operations, right, you need them to have their eyeballs in a certain area, because we're protecting the company's right flank, And so you get on the terrain model and that person's got their gun tube oriented in the wrong direction. So you correct it on the terrain model. And that's why you do those things, right? And so I made my subordinates do that. I want to see your arm extended, which way your platoon's direction is oriented. And so, and you do those things, right? And that's why you rehearse. And then you go through every phase of the operation. You stop at the end. Anybody got any questions? Yes. What about this? What about this? What about this? Okay. Well, if this, that, and you walk through that stuff as best you can. And so now you send them back to get their units, their squad members, and you give them, hopefully you get every squad now, you're going to come get on this terrain model for 10 minutes. And you're going to walk your guys through what they're going to do. So they have a very clear-cut image in their head of, okay, we're going to come out of this wood line, we're going to go down into a valley, right? It's going to be dark because we're going to be doing it at night. There's going to be a stream on our left, right? We're going to go through this area that has these two gigantic boulders in it, right? We'll move through that. And then when they do it, as they're walking, they're seeing all the things they saw in the rehearsal are all happening in front of them, okay? And that's why you do this stuff. And this is the deliberate part of execution. And then what happens in execution, that's where, the enemy wasn't exactly where we expected them. They were, 2 ridge lines over or a ridge line back. And now this is where the refinements come in. And this is how you can form the plan to actually win. And that is these battlefield adjustments, your head in the game. Even if you screw it up, unscrew it and evolve it to a win. And remember, all of this stuff takes place in time. So what you have to do, and we'll talk about this here next, is you have to manage time so you give your subordinate units enough time to brief their guys, because they're going to go bet their lives on their ability to do this. And what you don't want them to be doing is saying, get in a column and follow me. That's bullshit. That's bad, right? And people die because of that. Part 5, decision-making techniques. I want to talk about 2 decision-making models. Number 1 is a recognitional model, and number 2 is an analytical model. And before we go into anything else, I think that leaders tend to be biased towards wanting to make recognitional decisions because it's easier. And that's immature, okay? The more time you have to spend to do analysis, to gather information, to really think about things hard, that's what professionals do. Okay, so it's not a question of, well, I'd like to do it like that. The question is, how much time do I have? How do I use that time prudently to put these human beings who are going to risk their life on this mission in the best possible position that I can, so that they all come back alive and we accomplish the mission. That's our moral responsibility as leaders. So it doesn't really matter which decision-making model you like. The question becomes, which one do I need to use based on the available time that I have to put them in the best position to accomplish the mission and to come back alive? Expanding on what I just said, both models are proven and work, with a few footnotes. Decision-making techniques are neither good nor bad unto themselves. The problem with decision-making techniques tends to be their misapplication by leaders in time. So time will dictate which decision-making technique you should use. And I would tell you that it's foolish not to utilize all the time you can use as a leader in planning, in refinement, so that you can give your unit the best chance to succeed. I would also tell you that it's irresponsible and reckless to use too much time to make a decision, which allows no time for that decision and order to be disseminated, for back briefs to be held, for rehearsals to happen, and to get subordinate units in position in time. So the technique is neither good nor bad. What gets screwed up is leaders want to make recognition prime decisions when you have more time to be analytical. And then when something gets screwed up, people look at them and say, "You're an idiot, dude." And the same thing is that people get very nervous when there's not a lot of time. They take up too much time because they're being too analytical. And really, the great danger in recognition prime decision making is lack of experience. And it's rampant in junior leaders. You just don't have enough repetitions. And so recognition prime decision making relies on experience. When you have inexperienced people trying to do recognition prime decision, bad things can happen. Now, it is part of the occupational hazard of young leaders who are earning their stripes in combat. But if you're senior to them, you got to keep an eye on them. You got to coach them. You got to supervise them. You got to love them and teach them while they're doing this how to do it right and how to be strong, how to be good decision makers in this dynamic world, because it's not easy. And not only is it not easy, the consequences can be devastating if you fuck it up. So let's take a look at recognition prime decision making. Decision making that relies on experience to be able to eliminate a whole series of alternatives and rapidly come to a decision. Now, as you look at this image, what's X's next move? Pretty simple, right? For those of us who've wasted much of our time playing tic-tac-toe with other people. It's in the top at the center. How do you know that? Well, you don't have to sit there and analyze every move. You know it because you played this game a lot. So that's recognition prime decision making in a nutshell. It relies on experience. You exclude most outcomes immediately, and you come to a decision based on experience. It is required in compressed time situations. But again, the great hazard is people who don't have experience trying to do this. And that's when you can have disasters. So again, you got to keep your eye on them. You got to love them. You got to teach them how to do it. And you got to make sure that they have people with them that can help them as they learn. And an example, I can tell you, just in an infantry platoon, how would you do this? Well, you would make sure your guide or your platoon sergeant goes with your least experienced squad leader. And he's not running the squad, but he's in Overwatch and he's helping. And when something happens, they hop up and they say, "Hey, what do you think?" Or And if they're on the right path, then you just stay out of the way. But you're there to love them. You're there to help them. And if somebody doesn't like it, who gives a fuck? Okay, this is life and death shit. It's serious shit. And then as they earn their tether, you don't show up and get a whole bunch of leash, right? You earn it. At first, that leash is tight. I want to see you do this right. And after you've done it right a few times, then guess what? We'll let the leash out a little bit. And then we'll let it out more because you will have proven to us that you can do this. You understand coordinated initiative. You understand the dynamic nature of the battlefield. And you're pretty good at this. But you've got to earn that, man. You don't rate that coming out of the chute. You got to prove yourself. So recognition, prime decision-making relies on experience, and it's required in compressed time situations. Now, typically when I put this slide up in my class, you hear a groan. Ugh. So this is the Marine Corps' analytical decision-making model that was used in World War II. Look at all those steps, man. But when you look at battles that got fought in the Pacific, the movement of men, material, ordnance, food, water purification assets, ships, aircraft, all that shit, hospitals, that's the system that they use to do that. So it may look like it's cumbersome, but let me tell you, that won the war in the Pacific. So that's my point about if you have the time to do this, you owe the people that are risking their life to be very deliberate and analytical in your decision making, to use the time wisely and to use as much time to analyze the enemy, the mission, the terrain, the weather, everything, so that you can put them in the best situation to, one, accomplish a mission, and two, to come back alive. So this next slide is known as McPP, right? The Marine Corps planning process. And it's adopted by the Marine Corps, I want to say circa 1990. And you can see the general steps: problem framing, course of action development, course of action wargaming, course of action comparison and decision, orders development, transition. And so that is an analytical process, okay, refined from the World War II model that the Marine Corps used for an awful long time, okay, to something that's a little bit more truncated. Now, you could probably take all the steps that were in the World War II process and put them into every one of those things, because functionally you're doing the same thing, okay, but refined as we've gotten better at planning and understanding planning. Okay, but again, what I hope as a professional that you see is that recognitional is not good, analytical is not bad. What's important is we maximize the use of time to put people in the best position to do two things: accomplish the mission and come back alive. To be recognitional when you should be analytical is amateurish. In my opinion, when you're overly analytical, when it calls for more recognitional decisions, to me it always meant that people are afraid. They're just not comfortable in this dynamic environment. They're not comfortable being decision makers. And that's kind of what General Zinni was talking about right at the start. Those are the people that get bogged down by a single contact, by a single sniper shot. Okay? And so, again, time will drive which decision-making technique you use with two ends in mind: mission accomplishment and bringing everybody home. Part 6. The leader as a synthesizer in time. So this is where the art kind of comes in all of this. This is the art of making decisions in time. So as you've heard me say, a decision should allow enough time for orders to be issued, for back briefs to be done, and for rehearsals to be done. back briefs and rehearsals allow a unit to be in a more deliberate execution mode in time, which is one of the leader's objectives. So if you look at these spectrums, the top one is time. You can see when time is compressed, you're forced into recognitional decision-making. Relative to combat orders, they're going to be verbal orders. And in execution, they're going to be immediate action drills. So that's all three of those different areas of execution in a compressed time environment. When you have more time, the decision-making technique can be analytical. The orders technique can be formal, and our execution is going to be more deliberate. And that's really what we want to achieve. So the decision-making technique, the combat orders technique, and how much you can spend on that stuff all has to support the people that are executing this thing and risking their life, because we want to put them in a situation where they can execute in a deliberate way. And again, the last thing we want is for squad leaders running back to their squads saying, get in a wedge and follow me. And again, seen it happen. Seen it happen. The next slide is the exact thing we don't want to do. So I want to skip over the bullets at the top, and I want you to take a look at where are we executing. We're executing immediate action drills. Why? Because the order we chose to issue took too long. We couldn't do back briefs. We couldn't do rehearsals. Why did that take too long? Because the decision probably took us too long to arrive at. And this is the exact situation that we want to avoid. So if you go up top, drawn out decisions, long orders, compress the time. Now we've got to go. No back briefs, no rehearsals. And all that fails the people that are going to go risk their lives to get this shit done. And that's fucking wrong. So this slide is the exact situation that leaders have to avoid. Now in this slide, if you go down to the 3 bars, this is what it should look like. And you can see the decision-making technique is a question mark, right? The combat orders technique and how much time we take to issue that order, that's a question mark. What's not a question mark is that we're going to get this done and we're going to use time efficiently so that we're executing as deliberately as we can. Again, our best chance of victory and to bring as many people home as we can. Okay, so that's where we want to be. So putting those we lead in a more deliberate execution mode is one of our goals. And it's one of the goals of effective decision-making and combat orders process. Remembering always, it's all done in time. Reverse engineered from when are we crossing the line of departure? When does this thing go? And then making sure we choose the techniques that are appropriate so we can disseminate information, make a decision, be able to back brief, to be able to rehearse so that we can execute in a more deliberate way. Okay, so the decision-making technique and the combat orders technique should both be managed so that we're executing more deliberately. I cannot beat this up enough, man, because what you tend to see, especially among inexperienced people, is too much time to make a decision. The order took too long, and now the people that are going to do the heavy lifting, the people who are going to do the bleeding and the dying, they don't have time to rehearse, to do what they need to do so that we do less bleeding and dying. And so you got to practice this in peacetime so that you learn how to do it well. And like I said, I mean, when I was at Fort Irwin, there was a screw up, and the Army brigade that we were fighting against, They LD'd, so they went in motion 30 minutes before they were supposed to. And what we got told was, hey, too bad, so sad. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life in training because we executed the same scheme of maneuver probably about 17 kilometers from where we thought we were going to execute it, in terrain we weren't prepared to execute it in. We, simulating a Soviet force, were operating in the clear. We changed frequencies, I want to say 16 or 17 times during the event, if you can imagine such a thing. And we kicked their ass. It was one of the coolest things that I and my Marines were involved in while we were there. It was the coolest thing. But it was all based on the fact that we understood the order. We had rehearsed it. We'd back briefed it. We had everything. And then all of a sudden we got told go. And because we had done all that stuff and it was all solid, as we began to deviate, everybody knew what to do. And so that really is kind of, to me, a classic example of what we're trying to do, is get it into everybody's head. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we're doing it. And like what happened to me, even if you're executing it in terrain you didn't expect to, I still understood the concepts. I still understood what they wanted. And we did it. And we beat them. It was, and again, I mean, the crazy part was changing frequencies 16 or 17 times during the event because they would jam us. All that's capable. But again, this decision-making technique, combat orders technique, all has to be done in time so that you're ready to go. The people you lead are standing there, tapping their toe, looking at each other, say, let's go, let's do this, we're ready. And that's really what you want, to put them in that position. Part 7, execution, doing it. I want to talk about the concept of mental flexibility in execution. And I want to start the conversation with a couple of quotes. One is from Napoleon. I did not know beforehand mistakes the enemy would make, which I took advantage of. I simply studied my map. And when you think about that, I can picture Napoleon with the map turned around, looking at it from the enemy's perspective, laid out on a table, and sitting there going through the different permutations of things that he would do if he had their combat assets and was in their position in a war against him. What would I be doing if I was them? What would I be doing knowing that they're smart and they want to live and they want to defeat me? And so when he says, I simply studied my map, he's going through those things over and over and over. The next one is a quote about Rommel by a general by the name of Friedrich von Freytag Leringhoven. His successes were not due to the gifts of a magician, but to those of a great general who was continuously working out possibilities on a map, and who in this way knew more about the enemy's capabilities and limitations than did the enemy himself. And so what you can see Rommel doing is the same thing that Napoleon did. And I would tell you, Rommel was a voracious reader. He probably read everything Napoleon wrote. If you ask me, where do I think Rommel learned that? I would tell you probably from Napoleon. And constantly looking at the terrain. Could he do this here? No, he can't do that. The terrain's too wet. If he's going to do that, it's got to be here. And so he has this mental image of what the enemy is capable of and not capable of. But most important, as he studies this map, he knows this thing is not going to go according to plan. And he has to be prepared for the different eventualities that may happen in front of him. And again, why were they so brilliant? Again, you can see the quotes. They prepared hard. They prepared hard. They thought about this stuff, right, in detail. Now, the Marine Corps operates with mission orders and commander's intent. And what is significant about that? A mission order and commander's intent allow you to operate with a changed situation, a mission that may have now become irrelevant, and no communication. Okay, so even though what I was told has been overcome by events, I know what the intent of my commander is, and so I can conform what I'm going to do, even though it's outside the bounds of what I thought I was going to do. I can conform that to his or her vision. Okay, so commander's intent and mission orders. I think most of this stuff you guys will find, oh yeah, that's the way we do it. But as we evolved as leaders when I was young, we didn't have as much standard terminology. It tended to vary by unit. And so at some point, every service began to use tactical missions that were standardized definitions. So that's bullet number one. Only use defined tactical missions. Destroy has a very specific meaning. That means that unit ceases to be active on the battlefield. Neutralize has a different meaning. Seize has a different meaning. Occupy has a different meaning. So we use those terms, right? Number two, back briefs are always done to confirm the subordinate understands their specific task. So right after the order, you get your subordinates around you and you say, okay, back brief me on your specific tasks. And again, that's when you get that shit straight. Number three, rehearsals allow us to quickly correct mistakes that would otherwise be made during the execution. And again, that little thing I told you a few minutes ago about sticking your arm out to indicate your orientation is an important thing. Because otherwise, so where are your eyeballs? Where are you looking? What are you responsible for? If they're just standing on the train model, you may not know. But when you see their hands sticking out, their arms sticking out, and their finger pointing in a direction saying, this is my orientation, even if they're an infantry unit. I mean, it makes sense if it's an armored unit, right? This is the orientation of my gun tubes, right? But for an infantry unit, it makes sense because this is where my eyeballs are. And so again, we do that as we rehearse so we can make very quick corrections. And the more we can correct, obviously, during the rehearsal, the smoother execution goes. Now, in the order, there may be a couple of branch plans. And so let me just talk about that very quickly. Branch plans reflect reality. And I'll just give you a little example here. When we cross this river, we have not seen them here on this piece of land. If when we get ready to cross, they're there, then here's what we're going to do. This unit sets, this unit moves, this unit will then envelop and destroy them on that piece of terrain. So that's a branch plan. So branch plans are used to address certain eventualities that the leader thinks have good possibilities of occurring. Okay, so they reflect reality. You're kind of standing there saying, okay, if this, then this. If this, then this. And everybody's sitting there, okay. Now, we have seen no indication that those things may happen, but if I was them, I'd be prepared to do that, right? Everybody will say, yeah, that makes sense. But again, so branch plans reflect reality. So we've done all this preparation to get us to this point, right? The execution. Number one, it should be violent and relentless. As Americans, we throw a thunderous right hand. And the reason we want it to be violent is so they'll quit, that we won't have to do the fighting. And that kind of fighting can only be done by disciplined units. So all the stuff that goes on in garrison, all the inspections, all the cleanups, the reason you pay attention to that is because the level of discipline that you have in daily life translates directly to the battlefield. If you're undisciplined, if you're nasty, if you're late to formations, if you don't pay attention to details, and guess what will go with you to the battlefield? All of that. And how does that translate into violence? It means more of you are going to die. Okay, so that's the importance of all this quote unquote chicken shit that goes on in garrison. It's not chicken shit. It is the relentless attention to detail of the things that we get assigned to do. And we don't pick and choose. There's a certain way we do it. And the reason we do it that way is because if we do this stuff every time this way, we will do it on the battlefield like that. And more of us will come home. So to be violent and to be relentless, you have to have disciplined units. And there's no two ways about that. Number 2, battlefield reads. So we've got to the line of departure and now we're on the move. I've done all this preparation. And so in the first part of this movement, we're moving towards the river. I know I'm on the right flank of the company, right? Where are my eyeballs? They're on the right flank. Because I know the most dangerous thing that can happen is that somebody that we don't expect, for instance, an armored unit appearing on there, would be a bad thing. Now, there's no indication that any of that's out there, but my eyeballs are over there and I'm looking. And so now leaders begin to make battlefield adjustments. We understand it's a dynamic place. And again, I liken this stuff just like to a football game, a basketball game, a soccer game, a hockey game, any kind of team sport where you make reads and you react. Most of us have done that, grew up doing that. This is no different. I've got my head in the game. I know what I'm looking at. If I see activity, boom, all of a sudden I'm making a read and now I'm sliding another unit to my flank because I saw something over there that I didn't like. And that's the whole battlefield reads and adjustments. Number 3, as the situation continues to evolve, we continue to make adjustments. So I make a read, I slide a unit over further to the right because, right, that's where the risk is. We continue to move. I don't see anything else. And now I may tell that unit, right, that squad, hey, come back to where you originally were. I think we're good over there. So again, it's just the process of adjusting and continuing to adjust. Now, one of the hard things is this idea of forcing a plan or being steadfast that you believe you can use that plan to win. That's the bid for victory. So much of that is a function of having your head in the game and your level of experience. It's not an easy thing because, as the enemy pushes back, you have questions in your head like, wait a minute, what did we run into? Is there more there? And so it's an experience thing to learn how to continue to press while looking for indicators that tell you that something's different there. Okay, and I would tell you that that's what you really have to look for. If it's just a tough fight, then kick the shit out of them, right? I mean, nobody has more supporting arms than we do. Nobody has more precision-guided munitions than we do. I mean, use all that stuff and fucking kill them or capture them when they decide they don't want to fight anymore. Okay, if it's just a hard fight. When you see different things, for instance, you see a weapon system that was not in any of the intelligence, an amber flag should go up. Wait a minute, there's a unit here that nobody told me was here. Okay, something's not right. And now your antennas are up and you're looking to see is there anything else that I'm seeing that I was not briefed that was going to be here. And when you begin to see things like that, then you might get this sense of I'm forcing the plan. But again, this is kind of the art of doing this in compressed time, high stress situations. The more you read, the more repetitions you get. The more you read, the more sand table exercises you do, the more terrain exercises you do, the more you study the Civil War, the more you study World War II, the more you study Iraq, Afghanistan, the more you study Vietnam in particular. If you want to study the last time we fought a peer, study Marines against the North Vietnamese Army in the northern part of South Vietnam, a place called Leatherneck Square, in the northern part of what was known as I Corps. The battles that 3rd Marine Division had with the North Vietnamese regular army. And you'll see it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. But again, there's certain things you could look at, and what you're really concerned with in terms of being steadfast in believing in the plan and then forcing the plan is, are there indications that there's things there that you did not anticipate? And once you get indicators that there is, then to me, that's when you begin to come off that first plan and you begin to evolve it. I hope that makes sense. Part 8, the after action review or critique, but done my way, Mac's way. As you train, I think learning how to do whatever you call it, an AAR, an after action review, or critique of a problem, I think it's where the learning really, really takes place. And so you have to have it clear in your own mind how you're going to do this stuff. And so I would tell you that I split the critique into two pieces. The first part is going to be the decision-making, the orders process, the troop leading procedures, so all the cerebral shit that we do to get ready to go into an operation. And so to me, that's got to be something that is discussed, and people have to have the chance to explain themselves, what they thought, what they saw, maybe what somebody else advised them to do. And so you do that so that everybody gets the benefit of listening to the leader talk about this stuff. The second part of the critique is kind of this Jekyll and Hyde moment. And that is, we critique the execution phase of this. Now, I will tell you, this is a straight up asshole event because execution has to be hard. It has to be ironclad. And so when I critique this stuff, I'm an asshole. Why didn't you do this? Why wasn't this done? Why wasn't this done? And people get uncomfortable because, they get a foot up their ass. Hey, look, we can talk all the decision-making shit we want, but when we go to execute, bam, it's done like this. This happens, this happens, this happens, and there's no compromise. There's no compromise. So the AAR critique is kind of like this bipolar event. One is a cerebral event, one is an asshole event. So let's talk about the cerebral event. The way we evaluate how we did is by applying some pretty classic military evaluation criteria. One is logical combat thinking. 2, good tactical judgment. 3, timely and aggressive application of principles. Note the word timely in there. 4, seizure and maintenance of the initiative. So we'll use these criteria in both parts of the AAR. So I want to look at part 1, and remember, this is my way. My challenge to everybody is to listen to this, watch other people, watch the way different people do it, and then come up with your own way that you believe teaches these lessons. So, part 1, the thinking, decision-making part of the AAR critique. So what I do is I have the leader of the problem brief the following. 1, present your estimate of the situation to the group. What I'm really interested in is them turning the map around and then specifically speaking from the enemy's perspective, what they got told the enemy was doing, and then what they had to kind of interpolate what the enemy might do or fill in the gaps, right? Who is the enemy? What is their level of experience? What are they doing out there? What is their mission? What do we know about them? And then what would they be doing? So I want them to paint that picture. Next, what did you believe the enemy's center of gravity was? And what was the vulnerability that you sought to use to accomplish your mission? So in terms of a center of gravity, let's just say it might be their ability to communicate. If we can destroy their ability to communicate, we know in the past they've either surrendered or they've turned and they've run. So what vulnerability are we going to create? Well, maybe it's not a vulnerability on their part. Maybe it's a capability on our part. We're going to exploit our ability to find them communicating, and then we're going to blow the shit out of that, and we'll destroy their ability to communicate. And then as we begin to put pressure, blah, blah, blah. So again, you're trying to get them to think like that we don't want to take this unit on mano-a-mano. We don't want it to be a fair fight. We want it to be an unfair fight, so that we put pressure on the center of gravity through a vulnerability or our capability, a mismatch, if you will, like in an athletic game. Our offensive line will dominate their offensive line, so we're going to run it down their throat, and that's how we're going to win. So things like that, if you think about it like that, okay, because what we're not going to do is we're not going to make this a fair fight. That's not what this is going to be. Next is, are there any assumptions that you made? And it could be a whole variety of things. Well, we got told that, the closest reserve unit was here. So the assumption was there would be nobody coming to help them. So again, it's important, though, that everybody hears what the leader, how they put this plan together. And then what was the friendly course of action that you chose? And what we're trying to do with this whole look at a center of gravity and with vulnerabilities is put the enemy in a position where they are on what's called the horns of a dilemma. If I choose this, I die this way. If I choose this, I die this way. Maybe fighting this unit is not a good thing to do. So that's what we're really trying to engineer. But you got to make people do that. You got to make them articulate it, or else guess what? They don't do that. Next, what was the tactical mission you chose in order to engineer this dilemma? Next, recite the mission statement as you wrote it, the execution paragraphs as you wrote them, exactly as they were given to your subordinates. Number 7, how did we manage the time allotted to us before we began the operation? So this is all the intellectual part of it. And it's important that leaders, they hear this stuff, they listen, and then let me tell you what we don't do. We don't play the what if game. Well, what if this, what if this? I mean, that's stupid. The enemy's not omnipresent and omnicapable. And that's why I never allow that. Do you have a question relative to what just got briefed? And then ask that question, but I never play the what if game. Okay, so everybody understands, and then hopefully we pull that apart. Now on to part 2. This is the asshole part of the AAR/critique. And this gets very pointed and it's blunt. And as a leader, you cannot be afraid to be an asshole about execution. This is not an intellectual exploration of decision-making, of the dynamic battlefield. This is about hammering the need to be outstanding in execution. 1, did the warning order give us what we needed relative to our logistics and communications? 2, did we rehearse? 3, did we camouflage ourselves appropriately and conduct pre-combat checks? Did we do that shit? 4, did we commence the operation at the designated time? 5, did we execute the techniques and the procedures of this mission like a well-trained, well-disciplined, deadly unit? If not, why? And like I said, it should be pointed. It should be uncomfortable because there has to be a relentlessness associated with execution that we don't fuck around. We're going to go play You Bet Your Fucking Life. People are going to get dead. People are going to lose body parts, and people are going to have to live with that shit forever. So this is deadly serious shit. And part of the way you prepare people for that is this. You're an asshole relative to the execution portion of the AAR. Part 9. final thoughts. Here's some final thoughts. If you do these things consistently over time in training, your unit will be an action-oriented unit. And they will always be in the game, which is what you want. And if you continue to do this and work at it and do this and work at it and do this and work at it, they will become masters of decision-making in time. And in my opinion, that's what you really are trying to create, to get them to understand that everything they do is going to be in this time competitive environment. And it doesn't mean that, there's only that you have to do this thing at 1,000 miles an hour all the time. It means you have to understand time is important. And so as you talk about this stuff, as you critique it, as you AAR it, they'll develop the wisdom that goes through this. And that's what creates really effective leaders in combat. They don't get rattled. They do understand it. And they've got enough repetitions in peacetime to be good in wartime. One of the great challenges for leaders is you've got to get everybody repetitions doing this. And again, that's why you do map exercises. That's why you play board games with it. And there's all kinds of different ways you could do it. Get creative, make it fun, make it interesting. And when you play these games, give them a chance to win. And there's nothing that makes them want to come back and learn more as when they win. And so you got to construct, I used to use a coin. I used to use a 10-sided die, and we would do problems, and they would probably win half the time at least. And they got fucking fired up about it, man. They loved that shit. And even when they didn't win, they were really interested to see what happened. Why didn't we win? What did we do wrong? Where did we make a mistake? And really, the third point on this slide is this is what Marines signed up to do. They loved doing it. No matter what they say, they loved doing it. They were interested in warfighting. So as a leader, our responsibility is to create a vibrant learning and decision-making environment, one that they grow in, one that makes sense to them. And if you'll do that, they will perform at a level that will exceed all of your expectations. And I can tell you that from experience, right? Kind of like Field of Dreams in that movie. If you build it, they will come. If you do this, they will give you what you want. Colonel Zinni began this presentation by talking about the greatest problem confronted by decision makers is making no decision. Most of the time, the reason that they do that is because they're ignorant. They don't know what to do. They're not comfortable doing it. They don't have the repetitions. And in that ignorance, like in many parts of life, we're afraid. We're afraid of fucking it up. And that's where the inaction and the indecisiveness comes from. Great practitioners of this art in history understood that mistakes happen on a dynamic battlefield and that those mistakes could be overcome by additional decisive action. And if you teach this well, that's what you're going to imbue in your subordinates and the people you serve with is, hey, if you fuck it up, unfuck it. You can do that. Don't try to be perfect, though. We're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. Okay, but what we want you to be is head in the game, decisive leader, and even if you make a mistake, we're going to evolve it to a win. And that's just reality. And to bring this thing full circle, Colonel Strong Vincent at Gettysburg did not get up on the morning of July 2nd and think that he was going to become somebody who might save the Union. But in fact, the preparation he had done, the kind of leader he was, and the way he understood his role for his brigade, his division, his corps, and the Army of the Potomac, all that wisdom that he had as he went back into his home state, he put it to use that day and was one of the people who saved our nation at Gettysburg. So thanks for listening to this. If you want to send me your thoughts, you guys know how to get a hold of me. If you go to allmarineradio.com, you can find my email on that. If you go to posttraumaticwinning.com, you'll find my email there and my cell number, right? If you go to From Trauma to Joy, You'll find all my shit there too. I'm not a hard guy to get a hold of. So thanks for listening to this. I love this whole discussion. I love this whole endeavor because from the time I was a kid and played sports on teams, I've done a version of this. And the great contributor to my ability to make decisions in combat, and what I did was run combat operations centers, right? And so every day you're participating in the killing and the life-saving that goes on. And so my great preparation was playing sports, having my head in the game. How does the situation change now that there's 2 outs? How does the situation change now that there's runners on second and third? How does this situation change now that the game's tied? All those permutations that I learned how to do in sports and how it affected the game were my great preparation to go to war. And then I could see parallels here as I began to get educated. And Colonel Zinni, for me, was a watershed moment in my life. And I would tell you, if you're listening to this, that you can find that whole 3-hour presentation on the All Marine Radio YouTube channel. You should go watch the whole thing because he's the best. So thank you for taking this in. God bless you. If there's anything I can help you with, don't hesitate to reach out, and Semper Fidelis.